Well, it is about time I promote a film with a female director. To celebrate, I have chosen possibly the best of the bunch. The catalogue of Kira Muratova spans from 1962 to 2012, and what a catalogue it is. One of the very best female filmmakers of all time, one of the finest artists to emerge from the Russian nation. The finest case in point is probably the mighty existential eruption that is the Asthenic syndrome, released in 1989. The Asthenic syndrome's plot combines two different narratives, uniting them together in a tidal wave of woe. Muratova carries the torch of the Russian existentialists, moulding rich protagonists as intricate vessels for contemplative analyses of contemporary human communication. Explosions of individual strife wound the body of the collective civilization, allowing an audience into its innards. In the first, a recently widowed woman is enveloped in a constant depression which sometimes manifests as external aggression. She encounters several other people who are also on the verge of a mental collapse. This winds up being a film within a film. And then the second narrative follows a schoolteacher. This man falls ill to the titular Asthenic syndrome. He finds himself falling asleep at incredibly inconvenient times. Eventually admitted to a mental hospital, he gains an understanding that the people around him there are no less sane than those on the outside. Both stories beautifully and imaginatively shine light on the emotional machinery structuring human society. I would like to share 3 different excerpts from 3 different critical summations of this film. The first is from Kevin Hajopian. The film is not a political critique of a nation, but an essay on divisions. Muratova makes difference the structural height of her film, harshly splitting the film into a short black and white segment and a much longer colour passage. At even more basic levels, the Asthenic syndrome is a fragmented, even shattered text. Its editing initially seems desultory, occasionally random, as Muratova forces powerful thematic comparisons by pounding odd, incongruous images against one another. Laughter at a graveside, a bus carrying only one passenger. Paradoxes are heaped on one another in a film whose narrative is so loaded with digressions that its forward direction becomes all but stalled. Muratova's uncompromising stylistic choices are designed to create a structured mosaic of life in a land that was itself a noisy bricolage of the old and the new, a film that features the death rattles of Stalinism even as it fears the dubious enthusiasms of Reaganism. Destruction is the operative concept in the film, whether the self-destruction of the self, the community, or the seemingly willful destruction of the remains of Soviet society. The entire film is a drama of contestation. Every crowd on the screen fights and squabbles, mirroring the ongoing confrontation in the Soviet Union between the forces of retrenchment and those of change. A drama that was being enacted in the streets of every town during the stormy first release of the Asthenic syndrome. Now, some words from Evgeny Guzyatinsky. As a pure avant-garde artist, Muratova also reflects on the paradoxical relations between art and real life and questions how both are perceived. Since the first section of the Asthenic syndrome is revealed to be a filmic illusion, the second one is by association automatically understood by the spectator as an actual reality. But the second world turns out to be even more surreal and absurd than the film within a film we see at the beginning. Muratova is commenting critically here on the infinite nature of real life to exceed the limits and possibilities of any artistic representation, and thus challenges the artist's will to express it fully. It is not accidental that the protagonist of the colour section begins his trip through the hellish mundane world as a film spectator suffering from sleeping sickness. Perhaps this is a metaphor for the Asthenic syndrome of the contemporary audience themselves, living their lives and watching films with eyes wide shut. By deconstructing her own film, Muratova has the opposite effect. She awakens us from the deep lethargy we experience day by day, a lethargy produced by mainstream and mass media, politics and religion. And finally, from Matthew McWilliams, the society Muratova depicts is not a pretty picture. It is characterized by indifference, injustice, suffering, and chaos, and many commentators claim that the film's apocalyptic atmosphere foretold the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. However, the Asthenic syndrome is more than a narrow critique of late Soviet society. At times it seems to be based on a highly negative conception of human nature, almost in a religious sense, as suggested by the evocations of late Tolstoy. Some critics argue that it is essentially a film about death. According to Dmitry Popov, the cosmic emptiness formed around Natasha in part 1 reflects the death of God, and the second colour section of the film is life after death, a surrealistic world on the other side, a world without a creator, condemned to destruction. On the other hand, the film's title suggests a diagnosis. It is in a scientific register rather than a moral or metaphysical one. In this regard, Muratova shows us the symptoms of the disease, including inappropriate emotional responses, arguments, and sudden eruptions of violence, without ever pointing directly to an underlying cause. This openness is precisely what has allowed for such a diversity of critical interpretation, and it is one of the reasons why it is so difficult to say just what the Asthenic syndrome is about. Perhaps we should simply take Muratova at her word. Every time I am asked what the film is about, I reply, quite honestly, it's about everything. I could have saved so much time by just sharing that specific quotation from Muratova herself, but then there would be far too many lovely screen caps unaccompanied by any audio. So here we are then. This is easily one of the 10 best films featured on this program so far. What is the relevance of literature of films such as this one? I am very serious.